Hello movie nerds, and welcome back to Cinematic Sarcastic, a podcast that talks all things movies and television. I'm Natalie, and I'm your host. On today's episode, we are finally going to get around to talking about M3gan. Now, this is a horror sci-fi film. It's basically one of those dolls that comes to life, a la Chucky sort of horror movies. It came out last year. It just hit streaming, so I sat down to watch it, and I have thoughts as I do. Again, I feel like this one is just going to be one of those like Wednesday reviews where I am sitting at a table all by myself. I've heard nothing but like incredible reviews for M3gan, people just thinking it's like really amazing. I'm not sure if the downloadable like streaming version of M3gan is different than the theatrical release of M3gan because I didn't see it in theaters, but there's some things that I feel like got cut out and kind of makes the continuity of the movie a little bit tricky. So I remember from the trailer, the little girl, Katie, and M3gan doing like a dance number, but that doesn't happen in the streaming version. And I don't know if it did happen in the theatrical version. So in the movie, when M3gan like breaks out into her dance, there's no context for why she's doing it. It's just this random doll dance. But for anyone who's not familiar with M3gan, before I jump into just explaining the reasons why I wasn't such a huge fan of this one, M3gan is basically the story of a little girl, Katie, played by Violet McGraw, and I think she does an exceptional job here. Now, she is on a trip with her parents. They are arguing in the car. It's snowing. I think later in the film, they talk about how they were supposed to go skiing. Their car ends up getting hit by what I assume is like a large plow truck, and her parents die. She's then given to her aunt, Gemma, played by Allison Williams. And Gemma is kind of what I would consider a workaholic. There is definitely this vibe there that her work is really like her number one priority. Maybe she potentially should not have been the best choice for taking her sister's child, but that's neither here nor there. It's a movie. And so what happens is that Gemma ends up taking a toy that she was creating and finishing it up, and it turns into the M3gan doll, which will pair with a child and essentially, be a best friend to them. So it kind of reminds me of, if anyone is old enough to remember, like Kid Sister and Kid Brother from I think the 90s, maybe late 80s. They were like kid sister dolls. It was like a doll that was basically your size that you could carry around and play with. And that's kind of the vibe that M3gan is giving me, is just a child doll that you can play with. Now, obviously, because this is a horror thriller, M3gan's primary directive, so to speak, is to make sure that Katie doesn't suffer any physical or emotional damage, which right out of the gate is going to tell you exactly what M3gan is going to do. She's going to go around hurting and killing stuff in order to stop this little girl from having anything negative happen to her at all. Now, here is where maybe I differ from a lot of other people in terms of why I wasn't the biggest fan of this movie. I didn't think the story really made very much sense. It's almost like the direction of the characters changed depending on how they wanted the movie to go. Like in the very beginning, the character of Gemma will say she's awful. She is awful as a parent. She is basically taking this toy and replacing it with herself. She would rather work. She would rather be at work. She would rather not be paying attention to her niece, whose parents just died, by the way. And the Gemma is it's her sister that's passed away. She has one moment in this movie of half-ass grief over the death of her own sibling. And then she just kind of is right back into work. Like, she strikes me as a very cold-hearted individual at the very least. And then suddenly, kind of towards the end of the movie, she has all of this sort of care for her niece and wants the best for her niece. And it just kind of sort of comes out of nowhere. It doesn't really jive with her character the whole entire rest of the film. And then the little girl, Katie, I felt pretty much the same way about. Like, she obviously is grieving and going through a hard time. The only person, I don't know if person is the right word, but the only thing that she has a connection with is this doll, M3gan. It's the only one that is helping her through the grief process. The therapist seems like a joke. Her aunt is definitely a joke through the majority of this film. And so this little girl really just has this toy to help her grieve the loss of her parents. And then she turns against that toy at the end to save her Aunt Gemma, who basically has disregarded her the entire rest of the film. So though I understand the premise of the movie is meant to be, killer doll, Chucky doll, essentially running around and doing all of these things that are horrible, for me, M3gan wasn't scary at all. Like, there were a couple of jump scares and stuff, but the tone of the film, I think, was a little bit silly. And therefore, it wasn't, like Chucky or something like that, where the tone is to be horror. This one is a little bit more of like horror comedy, I guess. Like, there are some parts in it where it's just a lot more like lighthearted, I guess is the term that you would say for it. So it's not scary at all. And so then it really just kind of puts those moments where M3gan is doing awful things sort of, it's a little weird. It doesn't make sense. And then for me, the random singing, like, didn't make sense either. And this is where I'm questioning whether the streaming version and theatrical version are the same film, or if they cut out or refilmed a lot of it so that it doesn't quite fit together, because I did not understand why M3gan would just randomly break into song sometimes. like there's a couple of them that she just randomly starts breaking into song, as though song was somehow her emotional connection with this little girl, and that's not how it works. So I don't know. I found like movies like Chucky to be far more frightening and to work a lot better. You knew the motivation of that doll was going to be the same thing throughout. And this one was almost, it was almost like she just suddenly became a killer. And I don't know what it is with robots and like just suddenly being vicious. I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, she's smart enough to be able to kind of emotionally connect with a grieving child, but not smart enough to know how to like navigate around issues with anything other than murder. And I get that that's not the point. Like, the whole point of the movie is that she, it's a killer doll, whatever. I get it. But like, to me, it felt like there were so many parts maybe missing from the film that would have explained it a little bit better. And the runtime for this movie is not terribly long either. I think it's just under 2 hours. I don't know how they could have fixed it to make it make more sense in the same kind of runtime, but there were just some things in it where I was like, well, that doesn't. It almost seemed like the majority of the movie, we'll say like 90% of the movie, the characters all had the exact same motivation. And then because they knew that they had to wrap up the movie, then suddenly everyone's motivations, other than M3gan's, completely kind of 180 flipped and changed what they were thinking. Like her partners, Gemma's partners, the aunt, were totally on her side, totally wanted to put this doll out, and then kind of were afraid of it, even though they shouldn't have been afraid of it and wouldn't have had any reason to be afraid of the doll. It's just, for me, there was some maybe continuity. I don't even know if continuity is the right word, but just some story gaps that didn't make very much sense. So though I thought everyone did like a pretty great job. Especially I think that there were like 3 actresses that were working together to pull off the M3gan doll, like 3 different ones that did just like different portions of the M3gan character. And I think as a character, M3gan was actually pretty cool, but I didn't quite understand. I never really quite understand. Like with Chucky, it makes sense, right? He's like a serial killer inside the body of a doll. So therefore his motivation to murder makes sense. It makes sense. But with M3gan, there is no like motivation other than she's meant to protect this little girl. But why is murder the only thought in a robot when she has like endless amounts of information from the internet and whatnot? That murder is where you go. Anyway, I don't know. I guess I don't understand in my mind the concept of just murderous doll for the sake of murderous doll. And this one I didn't think kind of explained why she was that way, or why that was her go-to motivation, was just instant anger and instant violence. And I think if that had maybe been explained a little bit better, this movie would have been a lot better. It's not bad as a horror film about a killer doll. I think it's fine. I still prefer Chucky. Like he is my murder doll of choice, I guess, if that's a thing. But M3gan, I don't know. I guess M3gan would be under that. It would be under every Chucky movie because I really enjoy the Chucky movies. But yeah, this one just wasn't as great as I expected it to be, given how many positive reviews I saw of it. It wasn't terrible by any means. Like, I'm not putting it in like Rings of Power or Willow, like sort of this is trash kind of a thing. It was fine as a horror film. I think it's fine, you know, level wise, but I didn't think it was as great as everyone is talking about. So yeah, those are my thoughts on M3gan. I would love to know yours if you've seen this movie. Subscribe if you want to join the Movie Nerd family. You can find me on Instagram at Cinematic Sarcastic Podcast, and I hope to see you in the next episode.
Thank you.